Good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar on EPA dispensations. I'm Amelia Bodle, the Hospitality and Catering Technical Advisor, and I'm joined today by the Industry Manager, Jason Ben.
Hi, good morning everybody.
As with all our webinars, you're in listen-only mode, so should you wish to ask a question, you can type it into the question box. There will be plenty of time for questions at the end. Can I please ask you not to type questions into the box until we ask, as it is more than probable that we will answer your questions throughout the presentation. Everyone who's on the call today and whom has registered will receive a copy of the slides as well as the recording of the webinar, so long as it does record. I will make sure I get the presentation to you this afternoon, but the recording will be next week. If we don't manage to answer all questions, we will get back to you individually. Jason will be supporting me with the questions, and if you have any other issues, he'll also endeavour to help there too. So please raise your hand if you have an issue. So quite a short agenda for today. We're going to cover gateway and digital signatures, then confirm where you can access the dispensation documentation for each standard. A quick reminder of what we require from you, and then some further guidance, followed by any questions. A number of you have asked about gaining signatures on documentation during this time when it's not possible to see anyone face to face. We are absolutely allowing this. Digital signatures are allowed on the Gateway Declaration and any other document for authenticity purposes. Learners are able to just type into the Gateway Declaration, but training providers' employers will need to provide their signatures. It is possible, however, to get an email from an employer stating that this is in replacement of a wet signature and that they confirm their apprentices are able to go through the gateway. So just to confirm, dispensations are available across all of the hospitality standards which we provide EPA for. For all standards, the practical observation has now been replaced with a number of pieces of evidence which we'll ask you, the provider, to give us. The evidence will be assessed by the independent endpoint assessor, and then a question and answer session will be undertaken with the apprentice to discuss this evidence. That will then finalise the observation, and a grade will then be awarded by the independent endpoint assessor. The two standards which have an additional dispensation are Commis Chef and Chef de Partie. Here the additional dispensation is for the Culinary Challenge. Again, our process will be similar. We will ask you, the training provider, for some evidence which our independent endpoint assessor will assess. A question and answer session with the apprentice will be undertaken, and the independent endpoint assessor will make their grading judgment. Both of these activities are standalone events, though if required, they could take place on the same day. These dispensations are available for an undetermined period of time. It is likely to be a while before all hospitality establishments are fully functional. And although many will be opening this weekend for the first time in 3 months, there are also plenty whom have advised they won't be opening until August or September. People First will advise us when we can no longer offer the dispensations, and then of course we will let everyone know. So what documentation do we require you to submit to us? Let's take a look first at team member, production chef, hospitality supervisor, and senior chef production. These are all grouped together as the evidence we require submitting from you is the same across each of these standards. The only difference comes from the question and answer session, which differs only by the time allocated. This is 40 minutes at level 2, so for the team member, pathways and production chef, and then 50 minutes at level 3, so hospitality supervisor and senior chef production. I just want to flag here that this is version 1 of senior chef production, and we will only be completing apprentices whom were already booked for EPA with us. The evidence we require for the practical observation is, number 1, a witness testimony. This will need to be completed by the employer. We have produced a template for you to use, which it is compulsory to complete. This is referenced to the practical observation criteria for each specific standard. Number 2, an observation of workplace or realistic work environment practice completed by you, the training provider. This can be from any observed assessment which you may have undertaken in the workplace or in the realistic work environment if apprentices have been in there previously. This needs to be as holistic as possible, covering across as many skills and behaviours as possible to support your claims of competence for the apprentice. You can use your normal observation documentation. Number 3, we then need 3 copies of reviews completed by you after the 6 months on programme period, highlighting practical skills gained. One of these could indeed be your exit review. Again, please use your normal review and exit review documents. Number 4, an evidence checklist, which we have produced for you to ensure you upload the correct evidence for each learner. The practical observation witness testimonies and the evidence checklists can be found under each specific standard. So in this example, I'm using Hospitality Supervisor. So you go to the relevant standards page, then the first thing you do is click on the dark grey box named Documents. Secondly, click on the red Endpoint Assessment EPA accordion. This opens up the large box where all the pathways are listed. Then click on the pathway you require. So in this example, Food and Beverage Supervisor. And then finally, click on the dispensation documents. This then gives you access to the practical observation witness testimony and a guidance example of how to complete it. The evidence checklist is the same across all of these pathways, so this can be found in the bottom dispensation documents accordion. The evidence checklist is for you to use as a reminder for what needs to be uploaded for the practical observation and should be uploaded alongside the 3 reviews, the observation of performance and the City and Guilds witness testimony. So now let's move on to Commis Chef and Chef de Partie. Then we'll take a look at the requirements of the witness testimonies. So, for the practical observation for Commis Chef and Chef de Partie, the evidence which we are going to ask you for is, number 1, a witness testimony. As with the other standards, this will need to be completed by the employer. We have produced a template for you to use, which it is compulsory to complete. Number 2, we then need up to 5 pieces of evidence, which you can select with the apprentice to show their skills and behaviours. This is on-programme learning, and it would be beneficial for it to be as holistic as possible. Examples of the type of evidence which could be submitted here are training provider observations, evidence of any on-programme activities, e.g. the apprenticeship training manual, any practical assignments or projects which have been set, student social media account evidence, feedback from tutors, any evidence of skills classes and workshops provided, any catering for internal or external events which might have taken place, peer reviews, and any nominations for awards. Please don't send additional recipe log evidence, as we have already received these from you, and we can also view these to check on the apprentice's skills. Number 3, We then need 3 reviews completed by you after the 6 months on programme period, highlighting practical skills gained. One of these could indeed be your exit review. Please use your normal review and exit review documents. Number 4, an evidence checklist, which we have produced for you. This evidence is required for both commis chef and chef de partie for the practical observation. The question and answer session for commis chef, following the review of evidence, is 40 minutes, and for chef de partie, 50 minutes. So if we draw a line under the practical observations, and now let's talk about the culinary challenge. For both commis chef and chef de partie, we need number 1, evidence of the mock culinary challenge. This evidence needs to include the 2-course menu cooked for commis chef along with the apprentice's time plan, allergen information and any photographs taken with feedback to the apprentice. And then for chef de partie, the menu should be the 3 options of starters, 3 main course and 3 desserts with costings. Then the time plan, allergen information, photos taken from the actual 3-course menu produced by the apprentice, and then feedback provided. Number 2, a witness testimony from the person whom observed the mock culinary challenge. This has been produced by us and is available on the website. We've called this a training provider witness testimony, but if the apprentice undertook the mock observation in the workplace, then it may well be completed by the employer. Number 3, the evidence checklist for which we have produced. The question and answer session, which the apprentice will then undertake for the culinary challenge, is 20 minutes for commis chef and 30 minutes for chef de partie. And as I said, both of these activities, the practical observation and the culinary challenge, will be standalone activities with a question and answer session which will be arranged by the endpoint assessment. So now let's move on to the witness testimonies. The witness testimony requires 2 examples of where a criteria have been met by the apprentice. The employer needs to document 2 occasions when the apprentice demonstrated their competency for the criteria. The witness testimonies have been sectioned using the breakdown of the standards, e.g. business, people, kitchen operations, etc. They give the employer the opportunity to provide evidence of when the apprentice both demonstrated the pass as well as the distinction criteria, if indeed they did this. There will be 1 witness testimony for each standard, as they are specific to the criteria. And as previously mentioned, for hospitality supervisor and team member, there is a separate witness testimony for each pathway. Once the witness testimony has been completed, it will then need signing by the employer and the apprentice. This can be a digital signature. We have produced a guidance document which gives further clarity on the requirements. The witness must have worked with the apprentice for at least 3 months prior to the establishment closing. It will be acceptable to get the previous employer to complete the witness testimony if the apprentice finds themselves without a job following lockdown. The witness must also be in a role equivalent to at least first-line management of the apprentice. The witness testimony can be audio recorded, but it will also be necessary to submit the audio recording alongside the witness testimony template. It is necessary to ensure the recording includes the date, witness's name, their position, and relationship to the apprentice at the start of the recording. It will need to give a clear indication of the criteria that the example is referring to. And as I said, the example needs to be clearly time-stamped within the relevant criteria section on the witness testimony form. If you are using the dispensations and starting the EPA process, can we please ask that you attend the initial meeting with the apprentice and the employer? This is not to overly participate, but so you hear what the independent endpoint assessor has to say and can be prepared if you haven't uploaded all the dispensation documents to be advised by the independent endpoint assessor. They will be able to advise what is missing, so you can then upload everything to the EPA portal ready for assessment to begin. The EPA partnership managers asked me to share their contact details with you. If you've been on these webinars a few times before, you may have already heard from both Rebecca and Janice. Martin, though, is now taking the lead on hospitality and catering. He wanted to be with us today, but unfortunately, he had a meeting which clashed. All of the partnership managers cover all occupational areas in terms of endpoint assessment. So if you do want any advice on any aspect of EPA, please do feel free to get in touch with them. Okay, time for any questions then. Have you got any
So
questions?
far the questions are, sorry Amelia, so far the questions are very quiet.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we did say we'd wait and for anyone to be able to so if anyone's got any questions now, if they want to type them in, then please do. I just wanted to add a few thoughts about the question and answer sessions, because I have since been asked that question a couple of times about what the actual content of the question and answer sessions will be for both the practical observation across the standards and the culinary challenge. So if we start with the practical observation, the idea of the question and answer session will be for the independent endpoint assessor to be able to speak to the apprentice about their usual role. So there'll be no questions in there to catch the apprentice out, and nothing that they shouldn't be able to answer easily. So there will be questions around what their normal work previously, clearly prior to lockdown, what their normal sort of role is, what types of role, what types of jobs that they might do, depending obviously on which occupational area it is that we're looking at, shift patterns, if it was to do with the practical observation in the kitchen, then it might be asking about any recording that they needed to do in terms of temperature checks, etc. So it's just going to be delving into their normal role. So if you explain it to the apprentice in the manner of, it's to replace what the independent endpoint assessor would have normally been doing. So they would have normally been stood in the restaurant, in the kitchen, and observing the actual observation. So really what they're trying to do with that question and answer session is to capture the essence of a normal routine day. So those are the type of questions that will be asked. And then if we think about the culinary challenge for commis chef and chef de partie, questions will form the basis of the mock culinary challenge. So the apprentice will be asked about how they presented the dish, how generally the day went, whether there's anything that they could have done to improve things, etc. So it will purely be based on the culinary challenge. So I hope that's helped a little as well.
Wonderful.
Okay,
We've got a few questions coming in now.
brilliant.
So we'll make a start. The first one, as anticipated, is from David, and it's regarding the pictures of the culinary challenge. So what happens if you've got no pictures for this challenge?
Okay, David, great question. And we are going to be releasing, because we've had a number of, sort of good questions over the last couple of webinars, so we will be releasing an FAQ document as well. So photographs are ideal. However, if you didn't take photographs of the culinary challenge, then we obviously, can't let that hinder the apprentice's progress. So it is on there as one of our requirements, but if you haven't got them, then we will still review the evidence. It is fair to say that the dispensations are in place to allow apprentices to obviously progress. However, if they don't want to progress, then obviously that is entirely up to them. If they would like to wait until we're in a position to offer face-to-face assessment, because at some point clearly we will be, then obviously that is indeed their choice. And the other thing, I suppose, which would be good to mention here is if the independent endpoint assessors review the evidence and don't feel that there is suitable evidence or sufficient evidence, then they will initially come back to you via the EPA team possibly and ask for further evidence. But if it seems quite clear that there isn't enough evidence to actually for them to make a decision on whether the apprentice would have got a pass or a distinction, then they will come back and say that they advise waiting until a face-to-face opportunity can take place. So, for example, if a mock culinary challenge hasn't happened, then in essence there would be no way for the independent endpoint assessor to actually make a judgment on whether the apprentice would have indeed got a pass or a distinction. So in that situation, then we wouldn't be able to offer the dispensation. Hopefully that explains that.
Thank you, David. And Wendy's got a question around uploading. Can we upload any of these required documents at any time after Gateway is open?
Hi, Wendy. So yes, if you've got access to the EPA portal, then you can absolutely upload them. The swiftest way, I suppose, to get through the assessment process is to get all this evidence together and submit it all at the beginning, really. And you could have, upload a separate folder. So one could say, if we're talking about the chef standards, then one folder could say culinary challenge dispensation, and the other one could say practical observation dispensation, then plus your gateway evidence. So that would be a great way to sort of upload to the EPA portal. If you haven't managed to do that before the initial meeting takes place, then this is where the independent endpoint assessor will then which is why I've asked sort of providers to attend where they can. The independent endpoint assessor will be able to say, we haven't got this or we haven't got that. Can you please upload that? And that'll obviously have to be done prior to the question and answer session being booked, because the endpoint assessors will have to have the time to review the documentary evidence, check that it's absolutely fine and that they can go ahead and then book the question and answer session. If there are anybody who is currently in the process of endpoint assessment, so you don't have access to the EPA portal, then the EPA team will advise how to send the evidence to them. So that may be via email, it may be by them setting something else up if it's larger evidence that needs to be shared. So each EPA coordinator will arrange that process for you. Thanks, Wendy.
So Kieran, I'm just going to jump down a little bit because I've just responded to one of Kieran's questions by accident. So I was supposed to be responding to Wendy's, and my screen jumps at the same time as responding. So Kieran's question is around the mock culinary challenge. Can this be carried out prior to the initial meeting, or does the IEPA still have to set out the criteria for it, as for example what protein will be used and also the base dessert?
So Kieran, it'll be a matter of, you know, sort of what's happened up to this point, I think. For anyone that had a mock taken place, which perhaps was in agreement with, you know, yourselves, the training provider, you know, the apprentice might have decided that they were going to, you know, sort of do a fish, etc., fillet of fish. And you might have told them what base dessert if it was for commis chef. That's absolutely fine if that's the way it's been done. No problem at all, because obviously, you know, there's no expectation that apprentices are now going to get back into the kitchen to, you know, undertake that mock now. So there will be people who've already done a mock, and we can use that, even though it wasn't the endpoint assessor who actually nominated the dessert. There are some people that have asked me the question of can they now do a mock because they have got access to training kitchens, etc. And the question to that is yes, absolutely, because you can't go forwards with the dispensation without the mock. So hopefully that answers that for you, Kieran. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew's got a question for hospitality supervisor. Do they still need to upload the full completed business project? Proposal is uploaded at Gateway, and if this is uploaded prior to the question and answer session.
Hi, Matthew. Yes, so essentially across all of the standards, all of the other assessments will continue as normal. So the dispensations are only in place for the practical observation and the culinary challenge for commis chef and chef de partie. So the process for the business project is exactly the same as it was previously.
And Helen's asked if we could show the emails again of the EPA manager.
I certainly can, Helen.
Thank you.
Sorry to everybody's eyes as I'm blipping. There we go. Okay. Thanks, Helen.
Perfect.
I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And Damon, please confirm, should the initial meeting take place before the evidence is submitted, or should we wait until we have organised the evidence and submitted it?
So Damon, if it's a new apprentice, as I said, and you've got access to the EPA portal, you can submit all the evidence at the point of gateway. So you can submit the whole lot of the gateway evidence plus the dispensation evidence. That's absolutely fine. And then the endpoint assessor will then be able to access that prior to the initial meeting, and they will already then know whether they're, you know, if it's available, etc., or can indeed ask for more if they don't feel that, you know, there's quite enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Ray's asked, I'm presuming he's referring to Martin Newman here, but it may be an IEPA that he's been working with. Will Martin be doing the hospitality team member initial meetings?
So no, Martin is one of the support sales team who essentially are there to look after you all as centres. And as you could see, Martin's based in the south. So he was previously one of the sales managers, so moved across to the EPA team. So he supports customers to ensure that they've got everything that they need and they understand the EPA process, and he does that across all of the standards. So no, he's not sort of occupationally competent to be able to do any independent endpoint assessing. That would make him chuckle, actually, Ray. I should tell him that when I speak to him next week, that actually he's now been recruited as an endpoint assessor.
I was just about to say exactly the same there, Amelia.
He's got a very good sense of humour, Ray has, Martin, so that would really make him chuckle. But we have, so we've made sure that obviously what we've done prior to sort of opening up to be delivering the standards again is we've made sure that, you know, we've got independent endpoint assessors that have availability and are obviously able to do this. I suppose the benefit, because the assessment is now can all be done, you know, sort of remotely in their own home, so to speak, that it doesn't really matter whereabouts in the country they're based. So we'll have the ability to be able to sort of move things through a lot swifter for you. Thanks, Ray.
And Karen's got a question. Morning, Karen. Could the employer witness testimony be voice recording? Bit worried about getting these typed out in enough detail.
Yes, so I'm going to now sort of move forwards to that slide. So as you can see here, on the left-hand side, I've sort of said that. Now the guidance document, which you can see sort of part of here, which is attached to on each of the standards page, actually explains how to go about doing that. So you can just literally type into each example timing on the recording, etc. Upload the recording, plus upload the witness testimony that's got those timings attached to it. And then obviously the endpoint assessor will be able to sort of listen through and then pop back to certain things should they need to, just to check that the criteria has been covered. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. And David's got a question. When does the mitigation paperwork need to be uploaded? Is it at the same time as the recipe diary?
Hi, David. So yes, I think I've answered that one before. So you can upload it absolutely at the start. That would be the ideal time to do it.
Right. Sorry, I just need to let my screen just catch up with myself because we're on to a bit further down. So Lucy's asked, can you confirm that if the apprentice has already completed a task before lockdown, for example, the culinary challenge, and they just have to do the sorry, I'm just trying to read it through before March, and they just have to do the PO, for example, then sorry, I'm really struggling with this one here. I'm going to come back to that one. Let me come back to that one. And I'm just going to move on to Suzanne's. I have a student who was made redundant. He's starting a new job. Can the head chef at the new job sign the witness testimony? He was the head chef at the student's previous employment.
Yes, absolutely. So if he's worked, so the witness testimony, so as you can see on the slide here, on the left-hand side, the witness must have worked with the apprentice for 3 months or more in a role equivalent to at least first-line management of the apprentice. So yes, absolutely. And People First have sort of made it quite clear as well for us that, as I said earlier, if anybody has sort of is now doesn't have a job, then training providers can absolutely go back to the previous employer and ask them if they'd be kind enough to complete the witness testimony as well to support apprentices to get them completed through endpoint assessment. So yes, so long as they've worked with them for 3 months, even if it's in a previous venue, then that's absolutely fine.
And Polly's asked about KPIs and time of expected completion after the initial meeting with the dispensations.
KPIs in terms of how long it's going to take them to get through.
Yeah, I think she's asking for the full completion time through the process.
Okay, so there's no, I mean, People First have obviously everything had to be put on hold. So in terms of, originally there was 2 sort of 3 month window. People First with the new round of standards have sort of increased that anyway to sort of 6 months to get through the EPA process. So there's no problem with sort of timelines. So if you've still got apprentices that are furloughed and sort of can't continue, or you've put them on a learning break, then there's no sort of problem with that at all. Hopefully that answered that question.
Right, I'm going to try again with Lucy's question. She has apologised for some of the keyboard challenges she's had. So let's start again. So can you confirm that the apprentice has already completed a task before lockdown, i.e. the culinary challenge, and they just have to do the PO, for example, then they will not necessarily have an IM. The dates for the tasks will be allocated, then the additional evidence uploaded and then reviewed and the QA arranged. Also, then PD will be arranged.
Yes, absolutely. So where there are apprentices that currently are in the window of EPA, so prior to lockdown, EPA would have started, they would have had an initial meeting with their endpoint assessor, and they might have done, for example, the culinary challenge or the practical observation. What will happen is the EPA team will contact you, the training provider, and they will continue the process. So it's hoped that you'll be able to keep your previous independent endpoint assessor, but in some cases that's not possible due to the fact that obviously some endpoint assessors, themselves might be furloughed, so actually can't undertake the work. So what will happen is the EPA team will contact you and then book the ongoing activities. Now, obviously, what you'll need to do, and this is why I sort of said before that they will tell you how to then upload the evidence. So if we're talking about one of the chefs, and perhaps they've already done the practical observation, then the EPA team will say, do you want to continue with EPA now? We can offer a dispensation for the culinary challenge. You'll need to upload the evidence. You can't have access to the EPA portal because assessment's already occurred. So what we'd like you to do is to email it to us and then we'll add it to the EPA portal. What will then happen is the endpoint assessor will then assess the evidence, make the decision that everything's good to go, and then the EPA team will come back and book the culinary challenge question and answer session with you. That will happen, and then obviously the next activity would be the professional discussion, which would then occur in exactly the same manner as it did previously. So hopefully that properly explains that process. So thanks for that, Lucy.
And Sam has asked, with the employer witness testimony, it looks like we need to cover 30 examples to cover all the criteria. Do they have to be 30 different examples? If not, what can you suggest?
30 examples with the witness testimony. So in essence, Sam, when you actually look at the criteria, there may well be opportunities for the employer, and obviously you can sort of have a good look at the witness testimony, and I do appreciate that it's going to be you probably guiding to some degree the employer in terms of how they complete the witness testimony. You will see when you start to, they put in an example that it would actually cross-reference through to other sections. So you can see on the example on the screen here at the bottom, there's cross-references to criteria if applicable. So you can indeed then use those examples in a number of the actual criteria. So I would advise that, that's what you have a look to do. Because certainly if you start to write things, so for example, the one that's on your screen now is hospitality supervisor, but we wrote those sort of statements, and as we wrote the statements, we very much realized that as you start to do that, you're actually covering criteria. So without even trying, when we wrote those two examples, we were able to sort of cover multiple criteria. So hopefully that will help, and it won't then look as if you need to do so much. What we will do once we start to get some live examples through, I will speak to the lead endpoint assessors, and we'll see then obviously go back and talk to the training providers, employers, check they're happy, but hopefully be able to sort of use some further examples to be able to share with people so that you can sort of see that process happening. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just having to scroll down. The screen's just slightly frozen. Just bear with me. So depending, this is from Karen, depending on how long an apprentice has been on programme, they may not have done a mock culinary challenge that can be used as evidence. Say they have been on 8 months, they would not have yet done a mock. This is more likely to be done around the 12-month mark, and for CDP not until EPA has started, which dishes from the 3-course menu are to be done. As for dispensations are for the foreseeable, someone on for 8 months may well have been doing the adapted EPA. This requirement seems not timely. Sorry, I didn't read this one out in advance.
I think we've got quite a number of questions, Jason, on the same sort of thing. I can also see
Yeah, I was
something
just about
similar
to
from
say, pretty
Tracy
much.
and also from David, sort of saying, you know, what
Yeah,
happens if, you know, they haven't done the culinary challenge, the mock culinary challenge. Unfortunately, if they haven't, and there's no way that you can get them to do that, then we're not going to be able to use the dispensation, and we're going to have to wait until face-to-face assessment can take place. It is a requirement from People First. That was exactly the dispensation that was put in place following consultation with all endpoint assessment organisations. So we're all expected to use that as the dispensation. But you know, if bearing in mind the culinary challenge, you know, can take place in the college. If you are able to get them to do it, then absolutely you can do that and then still use the dispensation. If not, then it will be a matter of sort of waiting until face-to-face can take place. And as soon as that is possible, then obviously we will let you know. So it has started to happen. Face-to-face assessment has started to happen for other occupational areas. We've begun to see that taking place. So it will be something that we start to consider in terms of face-to-face practical observations. We're really going to be led by, you know, employers there, because certainly conversations that Jason and I have had have been very much around at the moment. Clearly what employers want to do is to open and to sort of, you know, get some money in, and on the basis that they're already having to run reduced menus, reduced personnel, and when you actually look at the government guidelines, it really isn't encouraging anyone additionally to be in the kitchen in terms of, you know, external suppliers. So I think that's going to be the sticking point, perhaps the practical observation. But that's probably not where any of you are going to have the problem. It seems like the problem is the culinary challenge. So in essence, we do need that mock evidence. If it hasn't happened and it can happen, then you can absolutely do that. If not, then you know, we will need to wait until face-to-face can be allowed. So hopefully that's answered Tracy's and David's and Karen's sort of point, and Wendy as well has asked a similar sort of question.
she has. I was just moving down to Tanya, who missed the start. She's asked if there will be any improvements on the meeting methods that we use currently, Teams and Zoom, etc. As trying to manage conference calls remotely have been challenging. Interesting comment.
Tanya, no, we are using GoToMeeting system, so which is absolutely similar to this scenario. So if you are struggling with that, can you sort of email me? I know that you've got my email, so can you send me an email, and you know, we can set up something that I can sort of set something up, and we'll see whether we can work with you to make it sort of work more efficiently. We're using the same process for remote invigilation, centres are, so, and there doesn't seem to be any problems. So it might just be, you know, the IT that you're using, but more than happy to sort of work through that with you and try and make life a little bit easier.
And Karen's asked, what platform will be used for the planning meeting, as all participants may be remote? Which is
Hi Karen, it's the GoToMeeting system exactly like this. So this is the webinar, but there's a sort of a sister system which is GoToMeetings. So as you know, pretty easy in terms of, you know, you sort of get sent the information and then you just sort of click on it, it downloads, and you're relatively in. So yes, just a sort of a little bit of a simpler version than this.
And Darren's asked if an apprentice has lost their job because the business is closed down, and I'm sure we're going to see quite a bit of this, unfortunately, and the employer is not willing to participate in the EPA, can the apprentice still achieve?
That's a good question, Darren. Essentially, the practical observation we're sort of asking you for, we're asking for the sort of witness testimony to be done. There might be sort of workarounds, but they will be on an individual basis. So if anyone does have some scenarios whereby, you know, that they can't get an employer to provide evidence, there are sort of other people that can do the witness testimony. So as you can see on here, it was a matter of a role equivalent to at least first line management. So there might be somebody within the workplace, you know, a supervisor, etc., that would be able to provide examples. So you can clearly sort of look at that. But if that's not the case, then I think probably a need to sort of contact us on an individual basis, and we can take special situations through to people first, can't we, Jason? So I think that would be the thing to do in that situation.
Thank you. David's asked, can the chef de partie apprentice do their mock challenge at the home, at the place of at home, sorry, and take pictures?
Hi, David. No, we wouldn't allow that because it's not in the correct environment. And how do we know that the apprentice has actually done the dishes? Plus, to some degree, yes. So no, that wouldn't be allowed, unfortunately.
One of my learners has an initial meeting on the 6th of July. Should we move this meeting to after testimony, etc., is uploaded?
No, there's no need to move the initial meeting. That's absolutely fine. You can leave it, but you will then be asked to sort of upload everything prior to the assessment activity taking place. But at least if you know, you can start the process, that's absolutely brilliant. And if you've got the details now, then you can sort of carry on with that. I know that's next week, so at least you can sort of perhaps tomorrow, if there's time, get the process rolling. So I would leave as is, and then be aware that you are going to have to sort of provide this other evidence. Thank you.
And can an example of the evidence be a scheme of learning, practical dishes, etc., which covers the skills classes, workshop sessions attached, along with feedback from the tutors for both common chef and chef de partie?
Yes, you can absolutely provide a scheme of learning, Suzanne. Yes, you could do that as one of the pieces of evidence. No problems at all. Obviously, there's going to be a need to make sure that, you know, learners were present for the most part of it, to make sure that, you know, clearly you've got they were there and that they did do it, etc. But yes, that's it. That's also another good example. I'll add it to my list. So thank you.
And Helen's asked, for the provider witness testimony, do we have to supply 2 examples as on the screen information, or 1 example observation plus evidence of this?
So it's 2 examples, Helen, because we want to be in a position whereby we can, wherever possible, you know, allow those apprentices to gain the grades that they are, you know, that they would have got, that duly they deserve. So, but as I said, what will happen as you start to write, or as the employer starts to write, you will very much find that it then cross-references into other sections. And as I said, I think, unfortunately, that's going to be a little bit of your role supporting with that sort of cross-referencing process. But yes, you know, I think 2 examples, please.
Thank you, Amelia. And Tracy's asked about the dispensation. How long will this be in for? I think you did mention this at the beginning of the slideshow, Amelia, but it's until we receive further guidance from people first on that matter. So as soon as they inform us, we'll let you know, but we don't see it happening in the near future, as it'll take quite a long time for the industry to settle down. So Suzanne's asked, some of our culinary challenge, commis chef and chef de partie students have done practice mocks prior to initial discussions. Menus have been finalised by the EPA. Can these practice mocks be used for dispensations?
Yes, absolutely, they can be. Yep, definitely.
And Karen just mentioned that Effie Guidance just released. Looks like we are back in September. Thank you for that.
Karen, I just that was, I think, emailed out literally just before we came on the webinar. Yeah, we've absolutely sort of seen that as well. So, you know, maybe that will be the case. Although I have to say, locally to me, I know that a number of employers are not opening their doors till September. So in terms of face-to-face practical observations, then, you know, if any of those have got apprentices, then clearly that can't happen because they're not going to be opening their doors. So, but great, I'm glad everybody's going to be able to sort of get back at it, etc.
And Peggy said that she has been given a phone number and access code for the initial meeting with the EPA assessor, not to go to webinar, so I have had to arrange social distancing with my learner and employer in a building. Should I have had a different platform sent to me for it?
Hi Peggy, you can all access via that access code, so there's no need to be in the same building at the same time, so everybody can actually access. There's no problem whatsoever with doing that. So yeah, you know, you don't have to all be together at all.
And Karen's asked, will a planning meeting actually be required, or can the evidence just be uploaded? And I think that's my screen.
So Karen, if they've already, so the initial meeting is part of the assessment process. So if they are new to EPA, as in, you know, you're just sort of uploading Gateway and they've yet to start the EPA process, then the process will be exactly the same. So they will still have an initial meeting in the same manner. If they're already in the EPA window and had a previous initial meeting, then they won't need to have another. So hopefully that answers that. And I know somebody asked me to sort of reiterate that earlier. I've just noticed another question as well. Somebody's sort of saying that they weren't clear on whether we wanted evidence being uploaded initially, and would it slow the process down? So no, Damon, it won't. You know, if you want to start the process and get the initial meeting done, that's absolutely fine. If you've just uploaded Gateway evidence, you will though then be asked to upload the evidence for the practical observation and the culinary challenge if we're talking about chef apprentices. So you will then be asked for it. So you will still have to do it, but it doesn't have to hold the process up. No, absolutely not.
And I've saved this one so sort of the questions have calmed down a little bit, but Karen has very kindly provided with us, Peggy has very kindly provided us with some very positive feedback, and just said that she would like to thank us for the information during this time. Hospitality has been clear, easy to follow, and above and beyond compared to other occupational areas. Thank you very much for that feedback, and special thanks to Amelia, who has got back to us straight away when she asked some separate questions before the webinar. I think we've all got to appreciate the work that Amelia's put in over the past few months with regards to mitigation, and also the work on it endpoint assessment and the changes to this. So I know we can't really do a round of applause, but really huge thank you to Amelia for what she's doing so far with regards to supporting everybody. So we'll get back to the questions if there is any more, because it had quite right down.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much.
No
Thanks,
problem.
Peggy, and thank you, Jason.
David's got one more question there. If an employer was happy for an IEPA to enter the premises, could the PO take place?
So, David, once we're in a position to do that, then absolutely we will. Obviously, what we need to make sure that we do is ensure, we can't insist that any of our endpoint assessors actually sort of go in and do this because they're all sort of, consultants, etc. And we need to ensure that their safety as well and that they can get there safely, etc. I know with these sort of hair standards, they don't have a dispensation in place. And obviously salons are opening up, so they've started that now. Clearly, in those situations, where social distancing can be maintained and they will all, sort of have PPE, etc., then I know that process is starting. But some of the endpoint assessors have said that they don't actually want to do that, so not everybody is necessarily doing it. So at the point that we can and we feel that it's safe, then we will be sort of absolutely sort of making a move to do that. But clearly we've got to sort of bear all those logistics, etc. And it may well be that, for example, team member and hospitality supervisor, would be slightly easier to do those perhaps face to face, bearing in mind the sizes of some of the kitchens, etc. But one of the other points is that we're very much asking the employer, I think, Jason, to sort of confirm safety, etc.
Yeah. No, so, absolutely.
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry. No, that's all. I was just confirming that. Absolutely, we do need to do that piece of work.
Brilliant. I can see Heidi's made a suggestion. Thanks, Heidi. Yes, if you can keep the practical observation and culinary challenge dispensation evidence in separate folders, then the independent endpoint assessors will be eternally grateful. Absolutely. So thank you for that. And I can also see that Wendy's asked a question about recording the culinary challenge feedback on the witness testimony form or a separate one. So Wendy, for Commis Chef and Chef de Partie, there are separate witness testimony forms for the culinary challenge. So when you go in and have a look, the documents are all there on the website now. You'll see that there's a culinary challenge witness testimony and a practical observation witness testimony. I think Jason's perhaps disappeared. So I'll carry on and just have a look to see if there's any more questions. So Ray asked earlier about whether the business project could be undertaken before it was agreed, and no, in terms of the business project process, exactly the same, and the independent endpoint assessor at the initial meeting will review the business project proposal and confirm to the apprentice that they can now go ahead and actually undertake the business project and agree timescales on when that will be completed and uploaded.
Sorry, Amelia, I'm back. I cut out.
That's all right. I carried on. I carried on.
Everything froze on me, so I'm back.
That's okay. I'm down to sort of Suzanne. So once evidence is collated for each apprentice, do we submit it via the EPA team? So Suzanne, essentially, if it's a brand new apprentice, then you will sort of upload it via the EPA portal once you've been given access to that by the EPA team. if it's an apprentice that's currently in the process of EPA, then each of the EPA coordinators will advise you how to go about doing that. So that may well be via email in those situations, or if evidence is larger. So for example, if you've voice recorded the witness testimony and it's too large to actually send via email, then we'll provide you with another process where you can add your evidence to a system, and then we basically download it and attach it to the portal for you. So all that will be sorted out on an individual basis via the EPA coordinator.
I think it's pretty much all covered now. I think we've covered everybody's questions. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Just checking.
Okay, I think that's I think that's about it, isn't it?
I think that's us. We don't seem to have any more questions coming in.
Fantastic. Okay. If there are indeed any that we've missed, then by all means do feel free to sort of email me directly and I'll get back to you. As I said, I'll send out the slides by the end of today. I am taking a few days off, so that's why the recording perhaps won't be available until next week. If it does finish recording, it takes a period of time for it to record. If it does finish recording, then I will get it out to you later today. So thanks very much, everybody. Thanks very much, everybody, for attending today. I hope you found it useful. So I'm just going to wish you a lovely rest of the day. Please stay safe and do take care. Many thanks. Thanks, Jason.
Bye.
Bye.